Joe Daykin is first up, which most of you obviously will know of. He's EMEA Media Director at GSK. He's appeared on NDA many times, and he's a force for good across the whole industry. He actually joined us at the launch of the 99 Club back in the real world in Soho in February. Luckily, Soho's where we are now today, a lovely sunny day. But Jerry started the whole thing off and did an amazing talk back then. I'm sure did the same today. So, Jerry, I'm going to start in a second, but a quick warning, and this is so everyone understands this. If you go over 99 seconds, you're going to get horned off. And every speaker gets horned off after 99 seconds. Yesterday, I horned off quite a lot of people, and some weren't happy. But that's the point. Get across your big idea in 99 seconds. So I reckon, I'm looking at the clocks, we're exactly on time. Jerry Daykin, it's over to you.
Brilliant. Yes, I did come to the last 99 Club and I talked a lot about how where we spend our money matters hugely, and you've got to be careful what you fund and what you don't fund. So I thought I'd balance it out by talking about the content side of things. We're in the middle of Pride Month. We're in the middle of an unprecedented time with the Black Lives Matter movement, with trans rights under threat in the UK. And it's really important to talk to you today about a sandwich. So on the next slide, I think lots of marketers at the moment are a bit nervous about what they can and can't do, what they should or shouldn't say. I'm here to say that representation matters, and it's really important that we do make some of these steps. And the M&S sandwich, many of you may remember last year, it came out, it was seen by a lot of members of the LGBT community itself as being a bit, tacky, distasteful. A lot of them got angry and pushed back, and I'm not here to judge them. But from a marketing perspective, I think we need to stand behind initiatives like this. I would have been super, super proud as a kid if my mum had been forced to see that in a supermarket, if that kind of normalization of LGBTQ rights had been around. Even more than that, I know that this sandwich came about because the M&S internal LGBT group stood up and they asked for it and they campaigned for it. And when they got a backlash, they really stepped away. And this year, instead of supporting gay rights, we're just talking about the NHS during Pride Month, which is still important, but not the same thing. And if you don't believe my personal story, P&G just very kindly did some research over in the US. They found that 80% of respondents who'd been exposed to LGBT inclusive ads were more likely to include, to be okay with a family member being gay themselves, compared to 10% less if they hadn't. So representation really matters.
I had to hold you, Jay, but you did it within 99 seconds, so congratulations.
I had a second to that. I had to call myself short, you see. It's why you time yourself.
I think it was just holding you, Jerry. So we've got lots of questions coming in to start the day off, and I guess we've got about 8 minutes to go through them. There's one here from Kate, and this is the sort of question I'd ask probably, and she asks, what media companies would you look up to or look down on over the last 3 months? Who's acted well?
Oh, media companies. I think, well, the trouble is over the last few months, everyone has said the right things. Certainly in the last, few weeks, I think, certainly from a race perspective, I think companies are really stepping up and saying, gosh, this is quite important. And many companies were doing the right thing beforehand. It's a little hard to judge in a way whether some of those companies are actually going to make big changes. And when I say representation, I guess sometimes I mean really quite casual representation. It can just mean like, when you're doing your casting, making sure that you sometimes feature slightly different households, different looking families, different looking people, through to kind of, there have been some great examples, like Starbucks would be a standout example. They did a story about a trans person, like a really deliberate emotional story, and to do with dead naming. That stands out, but even casual representation and positive stereotypes help.
This is a question from me, Jerry. We've seen a lot over the last few months about all the great D&I initiatives, agencies and tech companies, but then you've seen a lot of people sort of being furloughed and there's structural problems in the industry. What do you think the danger is that all these great, well thought out diversity inclusion programs get sidelined?
There's a massive danger in a couple of different ways. One, we often find in times like this, it is some of the minority groups that are furloughed faster and harder. Though actually, I think men have been furloughed more than women, so it's a different story to normal. And I think there's always a change. When resources are pushed, when efforts are pushed, you have diversity is sometimes seen as kind of a nice to have icing on a cake, and then it gets cut. So I think it's actually be a really telling time of which organisations manage to keep it going and keep it a focus, because it's not something that you can just talk about when things are going really well. It's something you have to double down on when you're struggling as well.
Great. It's a question here, anonymous, and I'm a very shy viewer. He or she asks, how would you push marketers to see the value in initiatives similar to this, or what you're talking about, even if minor public backlash is almost a given?
Yeah, but there is always a bit of minor public backlash. I think one thing is, you really need to get your heads around what that's going to look like. And it usually looks like a very small number of people making a lot of noise, whilst much greater people are happy with it. And if that's a real specific issue in your business, then there's certainly testing, like pre-testing, system one kind of stuff you can do. For me, the real reason for doing it, I mean, it's great that it makes the world a better place and it makes us all happier. The real reason for doing it is because it's your job as a marketer to reflect the consumers around you. And if you think all the consumers around you are kind of straight, white, middle-class housewives, you're very wrong. So it's actually just our job to do this. And we've got to push through some of that nonsense that says it's risky and scary. Yeah, but prepare for it, And it can come from both sides. It can come from the kind of homophobes and the racists and let's call them what they are, but it can also come from the community itself when they don't think you get it right. But I think the community will push you and challenge you, but always want you to do more.
It's a great question here from Kat. And by the way, remember everyone listening or watching, the Q&A icon button on the screen, give me your questions and I'll put them to Jerry, anyone else. But question from Kat, I think this is something that everyone thinks. She asks, how do brands avoid looking like bandwagon jumpers during Pride?
No, it's a good question. You get different answers, like, it's called rainbow washing and that kind of thing. One answer, from my perspective, I don't think people ever do, but I know some people do. Some members of the community think brands come along, put a flag on things and vanish. So one answer is that you don't just do it for Pride. You think about, what's the role of this the whole year? What's the role of your brand representing, talking to these consumers, being part of the consumers the whole year? I used to work at Diageo, and Smirnoff took some of its Pride budget and instead spent it like sponsoring nightlife angels in Soho and Manchester. So they did it all year. But I think, yes, there can be a sort of rainbow washing backlash, but just do it authentically and honestly. It doesn't even always have to be a charity. Like, LGBT people aren't a charity case, but we like to be talked to. We like to be heard, seen, and yeah.
Perfect. Okay, our next question from another anonymous shy attendee. They ask, how could you incorporate Pride with BLM and such initiatives? There's a lot we feel responsible to talk about and hard to know how to navigate the issues. Yeah,
there certainly is a lot going on. I think part of this talks to that casual representation piece, which is, not every advert that helps in this space has to deliberately tell every story and be about that story. So I think, if you look at the adverts you've produced over the last year or two, and if they don't show any black people, or if they don't, if there isn't a logical place in which they could have showed gay people or women in positive stereotypes, or, Muslim people, I think, just question, are you doing enough to reflect your community? It's not your consumers. Not every single ad can have every single thing crammed into it. And I think one thing that we found really helpful in GSK and other companies is using some of your own internal employees as well. Like, a lot of companies will have like what we call ERGs, employee resource groups, for LGBT people, for ethnic minorities, for women, for all sorts of different aspects, and checking in with those guys and asking them for their honest opinions on what you're doing and whether what you're doing feels right and authentic, or whether it feels kind of forced. Because not every brand needs to make a sort of big statement about Black Lives Matter, etc. But to be honest, I think it is powerful when they do, even if it's the first step in a much bigger journey.
Okay, question here from Danny. This is quite interesting and a bit controversial. He says, what should brands be looking for in the ethical credentials of a media owner when investing their budget?
Yeah, so that's a bit of what I talked about the last Nice Line Club, which is where we spend our money really does matter. And I think at the worst level of that, you've got to make sure you're not accidentally funding hate speech. You're not accidentally making some of this stuff really, really worse. And that's kind of basic brand safety, which we really need to make sure we're doing. Then building on top of that, as you imply some of that brand safety, you need to make sure you are not accidentally excluding minorities. We hear horror stories of brands blocking the word lesbian or Muslim and cutting out entire slices. I mean, I think every brand should be doing that. I mean, there is definitely an opportunity moving forwards to be more proactive in what you do, in really deliberately making sure your media runs in quality titles that funds positive journalism, it funds diversity. And if you really want to get to it, there are fantastic companies out there that specialize in connecting you with minority audiences, with diverse audiences. Some of the big media agencies have networks now. There's Brand Advance and companies like that. But across your marketing process, not just the media companies, your creative companies, I think it's important to start asking, what is the diversity of the team? What is the diversity of the minds who are going to be working on this? Because you get better work for more diverse minds. And if you don't ask that question, they won't be pushed in the right direction.
Jerry, amazing. We have hit time exactly. So I say thank you so much for being part. Always better when you're around. So thank you so much for this one.
Thanks for having me again. See you guys.